You know what? Let's just get straight to migrating a repository. Here we go. So the first thing we want to do is make sure we actually have the GitHub CLI installed. So here I am in my Ubuntu running on Windows Subsystem for Linux. I could be doing this in PowerShell, but I'm doing it in WSL because I like WSL. So if I just type GH and hit return, we can see that the GitHub CLI is installed. I can see all the different commands that the CLI gives me. But what we really care about are the extensions. So if we do a GH extension, we can see we've got multiple different commands here for being able to see what extensions we have installed or installing new ones. But in this case, we're going to do a GH extension list. And we can see that I have both the Actions Importer installed as well as the GitHub Enterprise Importer, which is the tool that we want to use today. So if we do a GHGEI-help, then it shows us that we're running an up-to-date version of the extension, and then it gives us all the different commands that we can use for this tool. Now we are specifically wanting to migrate a particular repository, just one repo at this point. As you can see, we've got multiple options, right? We've got the ability to revoke or add the what's called the migrator role. So this allows you to specify a specific team or specific users that are going to do the migration without having to give them any kind of elevated permissions. We can migrate secret alerts. We can migrate code scanning alerts. But right now, what we want to focus on, and we're going to go through all of those at some point, we want to focus on just this, the migrate repo, which invokes the GitHub APIs to migrate a repo and most of the repository data. So if we do a GHGEI migrate-repo-help, then you can see these are all the switches that we have for working with this part of the functionality. Now, if we start to look through this, we can see that we've got some things that are required, which makes sense. We've got to specify the source organization that we're going to migrate from. We've got to specify the source repo that we want to migrate. We've got to specify the target organization that we're going to migrate to. And those are the only three things that are required. I could do things like change the repository name as well. I've got some switches in here that apply only if we're using or migrating from, say, GitHub Enterprise Server, which we'll look at in some other sessions as well. We got the ability to remove any releases from the migration file, so to try to make it smaller so that we're within that 10 gigabyte limit. And it looks like we need to have two personal access tokens, one for the source and one for the target. Now you can pass these personal access tokens through the command line with these switches, or it looks like you could specify an environment variable, GH source pat, and then an environment variable, GH pat, and you don't have to pass them through the command line. That's actually the preferred way, is to create some environment variables to use for this. So that's what we're going to do in this and with what we're doing, but you do have the ability to pass them through the command line as well if you want to. So we need to go create a couple of personal access tokens. So if I switch over to, this is my source. So my source is in my DevOps organization, and it's the MyShuttle repository that we're migrating. So if I want to create a personal access token, then I select my user And I can go to settings, and I can scroll all the way down, and I can go to developer settings. And I go into personal access tokens, and in this case, we're going to make a classic personal access token. And I've already created one here, right? And I called it GEI Migration Source Token. And if we look at the GEI Migration Source Token, then you'll see that I gave it the scopes of repo, workflow, and admin. That gives me all the permissions that I'll need, and I'm also an organizational owner in this organization. Now, if I wasn't an organizational owner, I would need to be added to that migrator role that I mentioned a little bit earlier. But since I am an organizational owner, I can just create a personal access token with these scopes. Now, one thing to remember when you create a personal access token is you need to make sure that if you have SSO enabled on your organization, that once you create the token, you copy the token and then you configure the SSO. Otherwise, you won't be able to get that token value and you'll have to regenerate it. Now, I created that a token here in my source environment, which let's go back to our repository. And then I'm migrating to my Enterprise Managed Users environment into a organization called Mickey-Volcano, which is currently empty. And I've created a personal access token the exact same way for this enterprise in this organization. And I've got some links in the description of the video to how to create these personal access tokens, as well as the rights that they need to have and exactly what those rights should be. But it's pretty much what I showed you. Now that I have my personal access tokens and I am an org owner in both organizations, so therefore I don't have to be part of the migrator role. Now I need to set up the environment variables that I need so that I can do the migration. So let's go back to here. And what we need to do is create two environment variables, one called GHSourcePat and one called GHPat. Now, essentially what I'd have to do is just say export GHSourcePat equals, and then say whatever my personal access token is. And then if I want to verify that it had the right value, I could just say echo $GHSourcePat. Now, if you're on PowerShell, you'll do this slightly differently, but it's all in the documentation. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and set these up with my personal access tokens, but I'm going to stop the recording and come back. All right. So let's do a GHEI migrate repo -- help again to see what our options are. So we're going to start off with kind of the bare minimum. So we'll do a GHEI migrate repo -- GitHub source org, which the source organization was DevOps Elvis, -- source repo, which is my shuttle, and then -- GitHub target org, which is Mickey-Volcano. All right, so if we run this, you can see we're running an up-to-date version of the GLI. We can source target. We didn't provide a repository name, so therefore it's going to just create a repository of the same name as long as there's not a conflict. So in this case, it's going to create a repo called my shuttle. And you'll notice that we get this long little ID here. This is your migration ID. So if you have a failed migration and you're contacting support, or you're working with services or with my fast track team on your migration, then that ID is what allows us to be able to look up and see what happened with your migration. You can see that we did some validation, we queued it, and now we're currently in progress. Now I'm going to let this thing run without stopping it. It takes about 40 to 60 seconds for it to run. As you can see, we've been running about 40 seconds now. And what we should see when this is done is hopefully a successful migration. Now there is an option, if you'll remember up here, there was an option back on the main migration stage, not the migrate repo, but just GHEI, there was a queue option where we can just queue it and not be checking to see if it's finished. So in that case, what we do is it would just queue. So you have the ability to queue up to 5, well, run up to 5 concurrent migrations at a time, but you could queue even more than that if you wanted to. But you can see that the migration succeeded successfully. We did encounter one particular warning for this migration, and it gives us both a URL that we could curl down the migration logs, as well as gives us the ability to use the GHEI to download the migration logs. And as you'll see in a moment, the migration logs are also stored in the migrated repository as well. So let's grab this so that we'll have it here in just a little bit. So I'm going to copy that for now. But what I want to do first is, if we look in the folder where we're running this, then you can see we have a variety of different logs. Now these logs are generated every time we've run the GHGEI command. So even just saying, hey, -- help, it's generated a log. So here's the latest log from the migration that we ran. You'll notice we get 2 logs. We get a short log and we get a more verbose log. So if we cat out that short log, so let's grab that short log. Then we can see what we see in this log is exactly what we saw on the screen. Basically, it's just giving us the update and the results. Now, let's do an actual VI on the more verbose log and see what's in there. Now, this is what's kind of cool, because in the more verbose log, you can actually see the request and the response as we're triggering the different API calls. And you can see the GraphQL calls we're making to start the migration, to check on the update of the migration. So there's a lot of good information here that kind of gives you the guts or the details of how this tool is working. Because these are just API calls we're making to the migration API. You could write your own tool against the migration API if you wanted to. Let's get out of VI here. And let's take this and actually download our logs and see what these logs give us. So we'll run the GHGEI command to download those logs. As you can see, they're only available for 24 hours after the migration. If I look, there's the log that was just downloaded. And if we see what's in that log, by copying that, and we do a cat, you can see that this log shows us that the migration started. Here's the migration ID, and everything seemed to work well, but we could not allow a fork because it's not enabled at the organization level. So we get a lot of good information here, but what actually happened over in the repository that we migrated, or in the organization that we migrated to? So let's go to our Volcano organization. If we do a refresh, there is the My Shuttle repository. So let's open up the My Shuttle repository. Now, if we go look at the old repository, you'll see that it had one issue and it had one pull request. And if we look at the new repository, it has two issues. Well, one of the things we do is the very first issue where we add an issue in, that is our migration log. So that same log that we downloaded with that GHECI command, you get that same log listed here in the repository. So you have easy access to the log to see if there were any problems with the migration. We can see that our other issue migrated successfully. You'll notice here though that it's saying Mickey you say mannequin. Well, that's what's happened is we've migrated over these issues, we've migrated over the pull request, we've migrated over the code. However, we still have to map the old user, in this case from my GitHub Enterprise Cloud, to my new user in my Enterprise Managed Users, because there's two different users. So that's what's called mapping the mannequin users. And we'll look at that in a future video on how we can map this old user to my new user so that we can get rid of this mannequin tag. Now, it doesn't hurt, right? You could leave things just like they are, but by mapping the user, we do get the ability to say hover over the user and it lights up with my new user's information. If I go to pull request, we can see that my pull request was migrated over. You can see that Josh is still set as the reviewer, but again, he is a mannequin as well. So we've got to kind of map the old user to the new user so that it knows the correct user to have here so that Josh could actually perform the review on this. And of course, if we go to the code tab, we can see that we've got all our commits, 159 commits, a couple of different branches. And there you go. It migrated everything over. So let's make things a little more complicated and let's change the name when we're running the migration. So let's go back to our command prompt. And if we do a GHECI migrate repo -- help, then we'll see that there is a target repo command that we can add in to change the name. So let's run our command that we ran before. Migrate repo, source org, source repo, target org, and this time let's just do a -- GitHub or -- target repo. And in this case, we'll call it my shuttle -GEI single repo. And we'll hit return. Now this is going to start that migration process again. Again, remember my personal access tokens are stored as environment variables, so I don't have to provide them. And when this finishes running, we should see the new repository with the new name over in my Volcano organization. And I'm not going to make you sit through this whole migration. I will cut to the end. Okay, as you can see, the migration completed successfully. So now if we go back over to my Volcano organization and we go back up to the top, we'll see that there is my repository that was migrated with the new name, my shuttle GEI single repo. 2 issues, 1 pull request, just like the other one. We had the 1 release that was also migrated as well. Looks great. Now, this repository that we've been migrating has a release in it, or could have multiple releases in it. And those releases will add to the size of the archive that you're trying to migrate. So for larger repositories, you may need to remove those releases for size reasons. So let's go back to our command prompt. And you'll notice that there is a skip releases option. So that's what we're going to try. So let's rerun that same command, but let's just add the -- skip releases. Oh, look at that. I did not rename the target repo. So therefore it warned me that there's already a repository of that name, so it can't run the migration. See, we're trying to protect you from yourself. So let's run this again, and this time let's change the name of the repository to add on no releases to the name. Let's hit return. The migration is going to start, and hopefully when it finishes, we won't have any releases as part of the migration or in the migrated repo. Now, how long is your migration going to take? Obviously, this repository is not very big, doesn't have very many pull requests, doesn't have very many issues, so it's not going to necessarily take that long. Larger repositories will take longer, and repositories with more metadata will take longer. I have seen repositories that were 20, 25 gigabytes with lots and lots of metadata. I'm talking, several 100,000 pull requests or even, hundreds of thousands of issues. And those can take a day or two even potentially to run. That's why one of the things you have to do is what I mentioned in some of my previous videos are these dry run migrations. You need to do these test migrations so that you can estimate how long a migration will take, because that's how you can estimate how long the downtime is going to be, and allows you to determine whether you can keep releases or not, allows you to determine any other potential issues you may run into. So just remember, you need to test your migrations. You need to do dry runs in your migrations multiple times. Make sure you have the timing down so you know how long it will take. All right, this migration completed successfully. And if I switch back over and do a refresh, you'll see that I now have a repository, no releases. And if I go into that repository, I still have the tag because that's a Git thing, but I no longer have the actual release anymore. So we excluded the releases. And there you have it. We've shown you how to migrate a single repository using the GitHub Enterprise Importer. In this case, we're migrating from Enterprise Cloud to Enterprise Managed Users. And in future videos, we'll look at the same process from other systems. Now you might be thinking, we're just running that command at the command line. Can we put that command, multiple versions of it, in a file and then run multiple repositories? Yes, you can. We anticipated that and have included that in the tool for you to use. I'll show that to you in the next video. Thanks for watching.